I'm really delighted to have been awarded this funding to spend. We'll actually start in about May and continuing until November on this project called From Collections to Connections. And we are working specifically with several Black and minoritized community groups based in Brighton, but also opening up to the general public. But they are the focus. So everything that I've designed and have been working on has been initiated through initial conversations with those people. So one group is called Open Minds, which is a project that brings books that feature Black and minoritized individuals into schools. And I think to date, they've managed to bring maybe 3,000 books into schools across the Brighton area. And another project is called, and they also do walks on the round and about Brighton and Hove area, especially thinking about health and mental health for Black and minoritized communities and families. Another organisation called A Seat at the Table focuses on supporting parents of children of mixed heritage, Black and diasporic children in the school setting, where we know still that there's situations occur which mean that it's can be very difficult for our children, and not always the systems and procedures within those schools support those children or their parents. So this project, A Seat at the Table, not only advocates for children in the school setting at all ages, but also organises community activities to encourage them to feel like they belong in spaces where they can enjoy themselves and not under the watchful eye of not always friendly teachers. Although I say that, I was a teacher once. I have nothing about I think teachers are amazing. They do an incredible job, and it's really hard. So back to the project then, From Collections to Connections. It's running over a number of months, and it involves 3 key elements that are seeded within it. One is the looking into nature and into the nature that we have across the grass chalklands of the South Downs. I live just below Mill Hill, and so it's one of the spaces I've been walking a lot, and I've been connected to and lived in Brighton on and off for the last 34 years or so. So I know quite a lot of the South Downs, and I'm connected to quite a few of the people and groups that are here today. So this is a very familiar landscape to me. Some years ago, I studied environmental management at Oxford University as a higher diploma. And the purposes for that was because I've been very involved in the sustainability movement, going right back to Agenda 21 days, when we talked about sustainability in terms of wanting to make sure that our environment was sustainable. Now it means lots and lots of things. But so bringing that knowledge and this real connection to nature, a love of writing and poetry, but also of history. So I've studied history, started a PhD not so long ago, and also the sense of community. A lot of my work is also focused on community and activism and organising. Now, there's a really lovely Brighton TED talk by Bud Johnston that talks about, and he's one of our community representatives, who talks about not being just one thing. And we're very much taught through very sort of colonized, colonial type of education that you should be just one thing: a scientist, an artist, a writer, a musician. You should be one thing. That's never been my experience personally, and I suspect for most of you here, it's not your experience across the course of your life. So again, for me, to be able to have a project funded that brings together a lot of different facets is very exciting, because quite often funders want you to be one thing and to do one thing. So I'm going to read a couple of poems, and I will finish this quite quickly. So first we have... That's just a little bit of what I've been saying about the project. It's working in the Booth Museum, where I'm doing a lot of research. I'm in archives quite a lot. I'm quite happy being alone in an archive for hours on end. I'm quite happy being in the Booth Museum surrounded by a million dead and stuffed things. Now, I don't know, is that weird? Is it weird? But anyway, I'm quite happy being there. I feel very comfortable. I say hello in a very strange way to the heads on the walls as I go up the stairs. Do they say hello? Yes, of course. Yes, they do. Also the Downs, 3 locations: Mill Hill, Truley Hill, and Devils Dyke. I know the history of the Dyke, but not in the detail that you've just been presenting. So that's very exciting. And I also know that there must have been connections between Edward Booth of the Booth Museum and Hubbard of the Dyke, because they were both big into stuffing dead things. And had wives and intrigue. So there must be something going on there, which I'm really interested in as well. So, yeah, and so I'm looking at the connections I find between all of those different elements, and really interested in inviting our Black and minoritised families and individuals, community groups, creatives, to find their connections. And the launch yesterday, a very small, gentle launch, was basically just inviting people to recognise that we want you to come to the booth, we want you to be on the Downs, and we want you to be involved. The little thing I've given you, the little A4 folding booklet, is actually something you find when you go to the Booth Museum now, and it's a trail. It's in the middle. You will find a poetic trail to find South Downs and chalk grassland birds that are in the Downs, that are being some that I've been researching. When I don't find them in the booth, I go to the Linnean Society, Kew Gardens, and also the Natural History Museum, which there are connections through the Changing Chalk project as well. So I wrote this poem going round finding the birds, and then there's a trail and you can follow the trail to find the birds. But you'll also find a few other poems that I've written relating to the project and what I'm doing. You'll find out about our sponsors, and you'll see illustrations by our illustrator, who's a second-year illustrator at Brighton University. Here's a poem I wrote when I was in the first few weeks maybe of being at the booth, and it's just an experience of what it's being like. The Booth Museum Loft. Here, nestling in the twilight of the Booth Museum Loft, drifting through the memories of collectors whose names are forgotten but not lost. A century or more ago, some other hands took out this daybook. To add these brownish Sussex foxgloves, pressed flat, not knowing I would find them. And wonder if they'd grown their full 2 seasons. I see them nodding in the breeze of summer, as they always had, self-seeded after centuries. Such glorious blooms of white and purple, yellow and pink, calling to the long-tongued bees to come and share their nectar. And you, stilled foxglove, were there, those 100 years ago. Now, in wonder, I look on, not basking in the summer sun, but nestling in the cool light of the Booth Museum Loft. Thank you. So, one other thing that is really important to this particular project, and partly because very much interested in the history of not only the Booth Museum, but also of the notion of collections, collectors. We know that Booth, and the Booth Museum was opened in 1874, and Booth was the only son of another Edward Booth, his father, who was a man of independent means. And we know when we say independent means that that's very much independent because not having to work, but being wealthy through marriage, through investments, through the rent of land, and lots of tenant farmers, perhaps if they were owning large swathes of land, through inheritance, through government positions. Quite often, aristocrats took up positions in the government or the military, which absolutely brought in income for them and made them wealthier. And also then, of course, their colonial ventures. And by colonial ventures, we understand that to involve enslavement and obviously the trading or stealing or whatever that went on that caused people to become very wealthy through the colonial enterprises that they were engaged in. So a man of independent means who did a huge number of very philanthropic activities across the whole of Brighton throughout his life and through his legacy, also is a person connected to that history, which I consider is a personal history because I am directly connected to it. And I am here because our colonial adventurers were all over the world. The project also really tries to think about how we consider decolonising not only the museums, the South Downs, our natural environments, and our own ways of thinking. For me, I follow, not entirely closely, but to some extent, the Museum Association have created a really lovely decolonising program and approach to how we do that. And their thoughts, their sort of suggestions through their own research, through speaking to their supporters, their funders, their staff, suggest that we absolutely challenge neutrality. Everything we see around us, especially in museums and in archives, there's nothing neutral about it. Somebody has chosen to put it there. It was collected. It belonged to someone. It's telling a story. And if it's only a tiny bit of the story, then it's not the full picture. We have to acknowledge that there's always power and privilege within our museums and within our archives, and the fact that we're often asked to just ignore that. It doesn't matter, that this is again highlighting some of the most extreme versions of power and privilege that haven't been good, perhaps, for the working class, the minoritized, the Black and marginalized communities, and particularly anyone who's not from the aristocracy or from extremely wealthy backgrounds. Also, we're asked to build relationships through this program of decolonising. That's relationships with audiences, with communities, with organisations, with individuals, with historians, researchers, with other artists. And that building relationships, again, we are taught to be competitive all the time. Competitive for funding, competitive for jobs, competitive in absolutely everything. And not building those relationships through that process, I find, is quite detrimental, because information doesn't get shared, and again we lose the whole sight of the bigger picture. We're asked to value all forms of knowledge and expertise, not just that comes out of universities and from people with PhDs, but that is intuitive, that's the indigenous, the stuff that local people know. And as we have already heard, a lot of people, local people, will know a lot about their history and environment. Quite often it doesn't get heard or shared. Being ready to challenge norms. We know that the word norms quite often is used to isolate and reduce who can be involved in these sorts of projects, who is an artist, who is a researcher, whose voices should be heard. So challenging those norms is really important. And we do it with a smile on our face, and we do it with joy in our heart, not to denigrate anyone who already exists and is in those spaces, but to uplift those who should also be in those spaces. Being accountable and being transparent in the work we do, whether that's in the natural environments or in the museums, again, very important. And also making sure that we feel we can commit to this and be in this work for the long term, decolonising work, that is. Some people are not on that journey. Some people will choose to never be on that journey. Some people are on that journey and it's taken them a long time. And some people are far ahead of the rest of us. But it's a long-term commitment. It's not something you do on one day or 1 month or in 2020, just because there's been an event that caused everyone to be freaked out by the fact that there's a lot of Black people around and their lives probably matter. So we get over that, and we don't feel guilty about it, and we don't get fed up about it. We just go, hey, yeah, let's get real, you know. We take care of ourselves. This work is hard. This work is difficult. If you post or write about these things, you quite often get pushback. You get abuse online, and quite a lot of people will just shrug and turn away from you and I don't want to hear about this. It's got nothing to do with me. You have to get used to that, and you have to then take care of yourself. I go to the steam room and I have a swim. It's my favourite thing to do. Be creative. So many creatives in Brighton. Love them all. All of them need support. We shouldn't be choosing one or the other. We should be supporting them all. So that's just if you've got money, please send it to all of us. And also, we always aim for social, environmental, racial justice. So we include those from our disability communities, from our LGBTQ communities, from our working class communities, from our underprivileged communities, from you name it. be inclusive and always work towards justice and thinking of the future, because they are the future as well. So just to finish, I'm going to read you, here's a very little poem about being up on the downs. I go out a lot. I photograph quite a lot. This is a chalk grassland plant. And it's a haiku because I like those. They're really short. Deep roots of chalk plant, like me, in the growing droughts, survives and will thrive. We're looking for about 45, 50 plants, flora and fauna across the chalk grasslands, particularly, me and my assistant. And when we don't find them in the collections in the booth, the Linnaean Society are really good supporters. Very final poem. This kind of sums up my relationship to this work, because being surrounded by all the dead things, it does remind you about not only mortality but about something that's quite problematic about that sort of space. Let fly. This box is shallow. I look inside. 100 meadow brown butterflies pinned appear alive, but my warm breath upon their wings frees Maniola, Georgina from their delicate pins, and they rush up to swirl about above and round a dusky orange haze of silky sound, drawn off to where the light comes in, down the stairwell, passing rare and beautiful specimens, and out through the keyholes I have imagined, broad and long, to ride the warming breeze back to the South Downs chalk grassland where they belong.